Is creator economy recession-proof? No, but I do have a lot more to say to this besides those two letters, and I will cover another top 11 questions that I've discovered by just like doing some data search, putting some AI into it, just perusing the forums and Discord servers that I'm part of, where a lot of creators who manage their business now ask the questions about their future. And the very first one is kind of like a very standard one. A lot of folks asked the same kind of question a few years back during a couple of other economic downturns. Is the creator economy actually recession proof? And it is not. If you go to the definition of the recession, essentially it's just a decrease in economic activity across the board. That's as much as it is. And economic activity, people spending money. So governments can spend less money or reallocate the funds. Companies can spend less money, reallocate the funds. People, us individuals, can spend less money and reallocate the funds depending on our budget. So that's when that happens across the board, you kind of like see the recession because it becomes kind of like this downward spiral with everyone spending less. That causes some decrease in some of these indexes. People get spooked, spend less. It causes a decrease, and kind of like you see that downturn up until the point things stabilize. From the creator economy, the easiest way for you to think about it, and I've made an entire video about this before, right? Value flow in the creator economy if you want to search for it. But essentially, there are two key members to the entire creator economy work, like money flow. Those are the brands and the viewers. Between two of them, if nothing is happening, the entire industry is done, right? So as creators, platforms like YouTube, TikTok, right, your Spotify's of the world, any kind of like brand agencies, managers, all of us dependent on the fact that there's some transaction happening between those two parties or some value exchange happening, and we're just the value transporters between the two parties, right? And so in the situation of the recession, especially today, as more and more brands rely on the creator economy to go and drive their marketing initiatives, you will see the decrease in their spend, the decrease in hesitancy in allocating too much fund to a particular areas, especially if they need to like make the payroll, make all the expenses, they have debt that they need to service, right? There are a lot of other expenses they'll have to rebalance. And almost never in my career, right, and doing kind of like business operations for like 15 plus years, that I've seen marketing funds being protected above anything else. There's going to be situations where certain companies will decide to kind of like say, hey, we want to continue to invest because we're an early growth company. But in general, marketing funds will be affected. So that's your one half of the creator economy. And then you go to the other side of the creator economy, your viewers. Similarly, viewers will be hesitant to spend more money. They're going to tighten their belts. They're going to spend a little bit more. Maybe some of them, unfortunately, are out of the job. So they won't be able to spend and buy more from the brands that are advertising on the platform. So you will kind of like see this cascading effect where the brands spend less, and even maybe some of the advertising that they maintained yields less results, sorry. And that kind of like creates this, again, downward spiral between the two. So in my opinion, especially right now, as the creator economy becomes more and more important to the industries across the board, especially when it comes to driving the go-to-market strategies, we're definitely becoming less and less recession-proof. And actually, one of the quote-unquote downsides of YouTube becoming major streaming platform, creators becoming major players in marketing of products, is that we become more exposed to any kind of economic downturn. So hopefully this helps. Next question is, are there actually any opportunities for the creators during the session? And yes, there are. Primarily because still we're kind of like in this transitory period where a lot of brands still rely a lot on your legacy media, sometimes more kind of like, the paid marketing, things of the nature that kind of like represent maybe the past couple of decades of the marketing efforts. And as those sources are consolidated, or if say they're trying to figure out how do we save money across the entire board when it comes to us producing an ad, right? And today maybe they're paying the writers, the directors, the casting producers, the talent, they hire the location, they hire an agency to manage the entire process, they buy some slots to go and advertise on channels, again, legacy media, maybe even in print. So it's a lot of different people who are getting paid across the board. And the opportunity, I think, for the creator is the fact that they can become a single source of all of this, right? They can be a one-stop shop where you get your talent, you get your writer for the ad, you get someone who can produce it, you get a pre-baked audience if the creator is large enough, or if they want to leverage it on some other channel, right, that can be negotiated. So I think from that perspective, there's actually a lot of opportunity for the creators today to go pitch in and say, hey, I know you're doing this, and I know you might not have enough of a budget today to produce your standard multi-million-dollar single ad campaign. Why won't you spend half of that with me as a creator, and I'm going to very likely yield you much higher results. So I think from that perspective alone, there's a lot of opportunity for the creators, and also from the perspective of the fact that you will see more brands kind of like seeking advice on the audience. They would want to be more efficient with their marketing spend, more efficient with their targeting. And you as a creator, if you're a particular specialist in a very specific area, like for example, in your niche, you're the go-to person, you really understand what the audience seeks, you can become a great source of an advice, a consulting service for the brand. So you might be able to, charge them a retainer and become their advisor, join the company as an advisor more formally, get a little bit of an equity and kind of like help them work through this to help them be more efficient. So they might not spend as much cash on you, but there'll be opportunities for you to potentially take an equity position, take some sort of position from the growth perspective, right? So there are ways to negotiate. Feel free to reach out. We can always talk about the specifics. That's my bread and butter, negotiating deals. But something that you need to be aware of is the fact that there are definitely opportunities for you as a creator to go and like leverage it, whether from the cash flow perspective, whether from the perspective of expertise, or becoming the go-to single source of advertising for some of these brands instead of them, again, dumping millions of dollars on more legacy standard media. Next question is, will your income decrease and by how much? Unfortunately, yes. In my opinion, that's what I would plan for. By how much? Hard to predict, depending on your niche, depending on your kind of like, the pie chart of all the different income sources. You might be more or less exposed, right? If you have a physical product, that's probably going to go down in sales. If you have some sort of like additional premium subscription, that might go down. In consumption, AdSense will likely go down. There's like several different places where you might see a little bit more of a contraction versus the other ones. And in some cases, if maybe you have a membership channel and it's relatively inexpensive and it's a big source of joy, because of the fact that in the recession downturn, people kind of like seek additional joy and entertainment, they might actually protect the subscription and maintain it, right? So it's a little bit hard to tell depending on your specific exposure, but to make it actionable, assume 20% drop at least. That's my rule of thumb. In these kind of situations, assume at least 20% drop in revenues across the board and see if you can make kind of like manage your business, maintain the sustainable future with less than 80% now of the current revenue that you're making. So that's a modest assumption. You can, if you feel like, hey, I'm exposed a lot more, I'm selling like premium products and premium subscriptions, you might be exposed up to 50%, right? Like you kind of have to a little bit benchmark and guess it on your own, but the more conservative you can be with your scenario prediction, and the more sustainable of the business you can create within that scenario, I think the better it is for you. If, say, you assume 20% drop right now and you essentially cut your expenses or adjust whichever way you need to adjust to make sure that 20% of your revenue, you don't touch it, put it in the war chest. This is a great opportunity, even if you're not feeling the pain right now. I would immediately right now, as you kind of like watching this video, I would start thinking, hey, can I allocate at least 20% of my current revenue and set it aside, set it into the war chest. Don't touch it, because again, if the revenue drops more than expected, or because we're in the creator economy, things can fluctuate, at least you'll have that war chest to rely on. Hopefully you already have it, but if you don't, now is the best time to go and start assembling it. And again, if you feel like you're exposed more than 20%, just go and save as much as possible. Honestly, very rudimentary, but if say you're just a little bit frivolous right now and you maybe spend like 70% of your income on a bunch of other frivolous things and 30% is really going towards maintaining your company and your kind of like day-to-day expenses, mortgage, rent, things of that nature, cut all the way down to the 30%. Save that 70% aside. Next year at least will be very shaky. Don't risk it. Don't risk, being forced to go back to kind of like some prior state, maybe the different job that you used to do. If you want to maintain a sustainable creator business, assume a drop, assume as much of a drop as you can afford, if at least 20% or below, and set that money aside right now, because my suspicion, you might need it down in the future, and that future is actually relatively soon. Now, from the next question is, will brands cut their influencer marketing budgets? Yes. I don't know why I cannot write. I think it's coffee is still kicking in, but yes, absolutely. Brands will cut their spend. By how much, again, depends very much on the business, depends on the state of where they are, how much they rely on influencer marketing, how much they rely on different types of marketing to kind of like bring in the leads into the business to sell, because businesses still need to sell and they understand it, and that's why they'll never cut it down to zero unless it's like really drastic and there's no other way for them to save the business. But specifically for the creator economy, I definitely I already saw from some of the conversations that I've had with agents, with agencies, with some of the creators, that they're already seeing a decrease. And that contraction started last year. That contraction will continue to increase and there'll be more and more cuts. So definitely anticipate that that's going to be the case. And this is why, as I mentioned earlier, you want to make sure you be conservative, and if especially you're highly exposed to some of these sources, if you're highly exposed to the brand partnerships and you're already getting some sense that the brand partnership are decreasing in the volume, in the size, start saving money and put them aside as a war chest, because again, you will need it. Next question. Should I lower my rates for the brand deals to stay competitive? I'm conflicted on this one, primarily because I don't think you should. The reason, if your audience is still the same, you have the same size of the audience, you see the same levels of higher engagement, from the monitor perspective, you're essentially providing the same value, right? On paper. We'll talk about where there are some objections to this statement, but at least you are providing the same value right now, and there's no reason based on that for you to go and decrease the amount of money you charge for the brand partnership. Now, the easy way for someone to challenge that is to say, okay, but because of the recession fears in economic downturn, the same audience that you're now acquiring consuming less, they're less likely to purchase, they're less likely to buy as much, which is absolutely correct. I think that'll be the correct statement. And so because of this, I think there is a room to negotiate, right? And to say, okay, you can decrease a little bit your brand partnership deal, with understanding that the conversions might not be exactly the same, with understanding that the business needs kind of like, some sort of like a leeway to decrease their budgets because they're also facing the economic downturn on their side. I think, in my opinion, the best way for you to do it, unless you're really desperate and it's a really drastic scenario and it's like, very tough to find deals and it's been a while and you're just trying to kind of like come by an interesting deal and an opportunity to kind of like monetize and make up some of the lost revenue, aim to negotiate more long-term agreement. I think this will be the opportunity to say like, hey, I understand, you're absolutely right. There is a decrease in a little bit in the conversion. There's some hesitancy in the audience, but guess what? That audience is still the same size and I'm still doing a great job attracting it. For you, you need a little bit of extra money because I totally understand your CFO is pushing you to save money. Instead of us trying to stay at the same level, I'm willing to work with you and decrease maybe the budget by 10-20%. But in return, I'd like you to commit to me long term. And the reason why you're committing me long term is that as the recession, as the economic woes will decrease, you will have access to the same audience, the same size, or hopefully even larger audience that I will continue to grow over the coming months, independently of how much you're paying me. I will continue to grow it, but now you will maintain access to it, and you'll maintain access to it at a lower rate. So it's actually a benefit for you long term. Again, reach out. We can walk out the talk track specifically, but it's roughly the talk track that I think you should pursue in saying that you can partner, you guys can commit, but it's, when you scratch their back, they should scratch yours. There's a way for you to create an environment where it's actually mutually beneficial, right? For them, if it's an assured revenue stream, if they've been successful with the brand deals with you, there's no reason why they wouldn't take this deal at a lower rate, because again, you're helping them, you're meeting them where they are, but they're also securing you for more long term. And for you, it gives you a little bit more freedom. And you can be very open. It's like, hey, you committing to me for the next year at this rate, at the lower rate, will actually give me a peace of mind, and I'll be able to focus and create more content, give you more exposure, and potentially even yield you much higher ROI long term than we would have seen even in a normal economic environment, right? So there's a lot of benefits and there's a lot of ways for you to negotiate it, but I wouldn't lead necessarily with decreasing the price immediately. I would try to explore ways by which you can, judo throw it into something more interesting, like a more long-term deal, or maybe deal across more different venues. So something that will give you also economic assurance that this partnership will last long. But as I said, if you're desperate, if you really need to secure a deal, like God forbid you need to, make a mortgage payment and you're short, there's no judgment. Go do what you need to do, but set expectation accordingly that, hey, this is a one-off, we're all facing tough scenarios, so I'm giving you this one-off discount right now, help you, help me, and so on, kind of like. And you can also save the face, so to speak, through this conversation, but definitely I would not lead with it if you can afford it. Now, will my audience stop supporting you financially? Again, unfortunately, yes. I don't think there's any other way to put it. Primarily, you need to put yourself in their shoes, right? Let's say as you and I right now are sitting here having this conversation about, hey, you have to think about your expenses. You have to think about how you allocate your investment. That's the same exact conversation happening around dinner tables all over the world, right? Between different families, individuals talking to their siblings, and so on and so forth. Everyone is thinking about how to cut expenses. We've been very kind of like in my family, we've been on this bandwagon of cutting expenses, revisiting some of the expenses that we make for a little while, transparently, even just to kind of like, looking at some of the stuff, it's like, hey, do we really need it? No, people probably can go spend some money. Let me go like put some stuff on eBay and sell it and put it in the bank account as a cash just in case we need it, right? So it's like not desperate, not hey, we need it immediately, but it's was a thought process for a little while. And I've seen it across the board, and we will see it more, especially as more and more individuals unfortunately will be affected. So definitely I would anticipate that there'll be a certain percentage drop, right? If say you have a Patreon membership, you have a YouTube membership, some other membership website that you're managing, there'll definitely be less people willing to spend money, because one of the things that these days you look at across the board, there's so many different subscriptions. So one of the first things that people go after when they're trying to save money is that they cut their monthly subscriptions. So if you have a current subscription, that's definitely going to decrease. If you anticipate certain volume of purchases, say you're selling a coffee, you're selling a makeup, you're selling some sort of other product, should anticipate that there'll be some decrease in that, especially if it's a luxury, so to speak, product, right? They're consumable products that are more required on a regular basis, and if they're not that expensive and they're part of regular day-to-day life for individuals, they'll probably maintain and they'll keep buying it. But if you're in like a luxury category, so to speak, a luxury, think of any category or any product or service that is not required for you to sustain day-to-day living, right? So it's all the subscription services including, you're going to get cut, or you're going to at least be looked at as a potential adjustment. So don't anticipate you're safe even if you're managing a subscription service. Again, subscription meaning your own subscription service, Patreon, YouTube membership, any of those forms, right? Like anything that has recurring fee to it, it will be at least looked at. And if situation is strong enough for that viewer, they might decide to cut it, and don't hold it against them, because that's normal. And in years of seeing Patreon and have friends who've managed Patreon pages for like, decades now, decade plus, Patreon is not that old, you will see that flow up and down. And when you cancel the membership, the reason codes very frequently, and one of the most popular reason codes is just like life situation for individual change, they got laid off, and this is why they're now cutting down on expenses. So in a recession, that's absolutely going to be the case as well. Next few questions. Now, which revenue streams are the safest and most reliable during the downturn? Unfortunately, there aren't too many of them these days, right? In the past, when, as I said, folks were assuming, hey, creator economy is recession proof because we're like, everyone needs us. That was the case. I think right now, AdSense is not potentially, it's probably the most reliable out of all of them right now, just because YouTube does maintain a pretty consistent outlook right now for at least the rest of the year when it comes to the ad spend from other brands, which is good news for all of us, especially if you're on the AdSense. I would say this will be the more stable one. But even there, I anticipate a lot of brands kind of like cutting down their investment in advertising. And that kind of like goes across the board. You talk brand partnerships, they're going to be a decrease. If you're selling a product, digital or physical, there's going to be a decrease. Subscriptions, we just literally discussed it, there's going to be a decrease. If you're doing live events, things of that nature, you might see a decrease, because again, any kind of expenses that are not relevant to kind of like, living comfortably will be looked at. So unless you somehow manage a real estate and you manage a bunch of apartments, right? It's going to be real estate that's stable. People will still, spend money on their cars and drive around if they're getting to a job, groceries, things of that nature, obviously heat, electricity, things of that nature. They'll be very stable, right? But anything else outside of it, if it's not required for a comfortable living, just anticipate, as I said several times now, it's going to be looked at. And so from that perspective, there aren't necessarily a lot of safe revenue streams. This is one of those scenarios where, good reminder, and you've heard it multiple times before, it's good to have diversified streams. If you don't, and you kind of like rely today on subscription service, subscription service, if you rely on a revenue stream like YouTube AdSense, you're probably in okay shape. You're going to see some more fluctuation to it, but you're going to be okay. Everything else, as I said earlier, a few questions before, assume at least a 20% drop, or whatever drop you can afford. The more of a drop you can afford, the more money you can put in the war chest. Do it, because I promise you, no matter what people say, there is no recession-proof revenue stream today. So operate under that assumption. I know it's a conservative and stressful assumption, but my responsibility to you as someone who wants you to build a sustainable creator business is to help you survive any kind of downturn. And if you have to survive any kind of downturn, assume the worst case scenario. That's unfortunately how the best, more stable financial organizations function, right? Like the best CFOs across the world, when they see economic downturn, they shore up as much cash as possible, which is creating a war chest, and they cut off any other unnecessary expenses. Like literally anything that can be cut, they cut it, even if it creates some discomfort for the organization, because that offers them an opportunity to maintain a more stable kind of like environment for a little while. So for you, that example can be, and I know I'm jumping a little bit the topic to the expenses, but that's a good example where you should go and revisit some of the expenses right now and see how crucial they are to your business. The last question talks about that, so I'll save some of the other further points to that, but just understand, shore up the cash, cut the expenses. That's something you need to be looking at, and that's exactly why you cannot assume that, hey, your revenue will be safe and secure. So how can I provide additional value to ROI when the budgets are tight? Good question. And something we already touched on. The whole idea is you are the individual who presents themselves as a expert on that industry because you're interacting with the audience. You're expert on the type of content they consume because you provide that content. You can produce that content, so you can produce a potential advertising piece for them, and you're also a distribution channel for that brand. So I think between those two, the biggest ROI you can offer is that you're a one-stop shop. So right now they don't need to coordinate and pay fees to the agencies to hire the talent, to find placement somewhere, on the legacy media. They can do it all with you. So to avoid repeating myself too much, the biggest ROI you can offer is the fact that you have this opportunity. And if you have like a newsletter, if you have long form videos and short form videos, if you have a podcast, present all of this. This is your opportunity to say like, hey, working with me, not only you get, again, right, the expert on the industry, the talent, not only you get someone who can produce all this content, I can also produce multiple different types. I can be on the podcast and I'll do the podcast read. I'll have a long form video. I'll do the video read. I'll be on short form and I'll do the short form advertising for you. I have a newsletter and I'll put you in my newsletter, right? Offer as many services as possible. As we discussed before, maybe you'll have to offer just a little bit of a discount, but if you do, ensure that you discuss a more long-term engagement so they provide you with the financial security and you provide them with multiple different stable channels to distribute their messaging across, or different links to purchase their product, service, whatever their end goal might be. You have that opportunity to maximize the ROI. So emphasize your one-stop shop finesse, and emphasize if you have multiple different distribution channels between long form, short form, podcast, newsletter, advertise that as well to them. What type of content performs the best during a recession? This is an interesting one. There's actually, I did a little bit of reading on this, and again, avoid different stats and over polluting too much the response. Essentially, people enjoy watching something that distracts them from the reality of the day to day. That's the unfortunate truth, right? Like when we try to distress and relax, people usually, go watch anything that can be very entertaining, very joyful. It can be more kind of like relaxing to the brain. I don't know, watching some Korean guy setting up inflatable camp and hanging out with his dog, right? Or watching maybe other guys arriving somewhere in Alaska and building up a fireplace. Again, a lot of winter themes. That was one of those things that I got into a few months back. But there are different opportunities for folks to go and relax their brain across the content, but it's usually that's the kind of stuff people like to watch. Unfortunately, if you're producing, say, a lot of political content, you produce a lot of content that discusses the current economic environment, you might see a little bit of a tepidness in terms of like people wanting to watch it, because especially if it's a little bit, kind of like you put them a little bit on the edge. It's a lot about getting that negative energy out of it, which I get it. That drives the engagement. So there are a lot of channels out there that do that. Unfortunately, you will see a little bit of a decrease because people try to stay away from that because they're already maybe upset. They're stressed with their day to day. They're trying to make their bills. The last thing they need, hopefully, is to go sit there and yell at the screen and shake their hand about something. So they'll try to relax. They try to do something that gives them peace of mind. So if your content is a lot on that kind of like, subject, like you help to get the peace of mind, your content does not necessarily comment on the current political environment, doesn't comment on the current political environment, you kind of like let them go and get distracted, get transported elsewhere, you're in a good place. Anyone else, especially who we're talking about, as I said, something negative, anticipate there will be a little bit of a drop. But again, you can, without trading in the value that you provide, you can probably create some content on the fringes of it to recognize the fact that, like, hey guys, I know we usually go and like yell at each other and debate, and we enjoy that kind of content about some political situation, but right now, to give you peace of mind, let's talk about something positive, right? And you can do maybe a little bit of a positive spin, staying within your niche. So, small consideration. Again, you know your audience and your channel best. Don't listen to the operations guy about how to manage your channel. I know how to manage your business, not necessarily your content. So you go do those things. You're an expert on that. Now, how can I diversify my income effectively and quickly? Tough question, because if you are right now in a situation where you do not necessarily have a lot of income diversity, you don't have multiple revenue streams, it can be tough to go and quickly shore up those sources because they'll likely require an investment, right? If you say we're working on some major project and you're about to release the product, you're in decent shape to go and kind of like start thinking about, hey, how quickly can I get it to market? And maybe you can accelerate a little bit the timeline. If you would want to start thinking about it from scratch, it's going to be the tough one, especially in uncertainty and with all the tariffs and things like this. If you're dealing with a physical product, right, or in general uncertainty because of the economic environment, it can be tough right now to go and diversify. I think, in my opinion, I'll put it this way. There's an offensive and defensive way of doing it. The offensive and defensive way of sustaining your business through the economic downturn. The offensive way is gain more revenue. Defensive way, cut the costs. In my opinion, as a business, unless you had some of the ideas already in progress and you're getting close, the best bet for you to prevent any kind of like issues or huge stresses to your business through the economic downturn, go the defensive play. Revisit your costs, revisit your expenses, think about those areas. Getting aggressive with investment side or kind of like increasing the revenue can be tough unless, as I said, you have some sort of already idea in flight and maybe you're like 70% done and you can just figure out how can you minimize the cost to get it to the 100%. Or as I mentioned earlier, when it comes to the opportunities, you might have an opportunity to generate more revenue by working with some of the businesses, being their advisor, or potentially attracting some of the ad spend that wasn't available to you because that ad spend used to be spent on like legacy media, but now as the CMOs have to tighten the budget, they'll start looking elsewhere to see if they can gain as much of a viewership for less of a dollar, and they can come to you and work with you. So those are your offensive plays, I would say, and that's primarily what I would go after. I wouldn't try to build the physical product, wouldn't try to build something completely from scratch, wouldn't try to invest something long-term on the assumption that, hey, things going to be the same, right? Things going to go down. And I don't know if you have a way to build a business right now or build out some interesting idea with minimum expenses, do it. Otherwise, if it's going to dip too much into your cash, if I'll be a friend, if I'll be the CFO of your company, I would say, hey, let's first make sure we have a war chest to last at least a year, right? 6 months to a year. And I know it's a lot, but can you last 6 months to a year off of your war chest, maintaining minimum expenses to continue producing content and living a comfortable life? Meaning not like traveling maybe and whatnot and buying a new car, but like you're going to pay for your house, you're going to pay for your food, you're going to pay for your kids' school and pay for a car, something like that, right? Like something basic. Can you support all of this plus a couple of salaries if you have employees, or expenses if you have on the business side, like subscription for Adobe Cloud? Can you sustain it for 6 months to a year? If you can, set that war chest aside, and anything else that you can generate in terms of the additional savings, invest that. That will be a little bit more comfortable saying, okay, if something falls through, all of your revenue dropped off, at least you know you can last for a year, then you're kind of like in a safe position to go and start investing. Otherwise, I would not invest incrementally into any new business idea. If it's an existing business idea, evaluate if you can get it to 100% without dipping too much into your savings, but primarily focus on, from the offensive play, opportunities working with the brands, opportunities acquiring the ad spend that wasn't available to you, and then it's all about the defensive play. Defend your expenses. And this gets us close to the last couple of questions. Next one being, will competition increase as more people try to content create to make money? I actually don't think so. I might eat my words, and there were a lot of people who were laid off who kind of like tried to go into the content creation. We all know it's tough. Like on a one-off basis, grab your phone, record a little bit of a content, absolutely. And I'll always tell people like that's how you start. From the perspective of them becoming your competition for eyeballs, that's always going to be the case. You always have, every day there's a new talented creator who bursts on scene and they can take away our views. That's absolutely normal. I don't think that will change. More people will start watching content as I said, as a way maybe to kind of like distress themselves. Unfortunately, if they're out of the job, they'll have a little bit more free time, so they'll consume. So from that perspective, yes, you'll see increase in demand, but you'll also probably see some increase in competition for the viewership. From the business perspective, I don't think so, because You all know how hard it is to create a sustainable revenue stream, sustainable relationship for the brand partnerships, right? All of it takes time and all of it takes reputation. You'll have to prove that you're sustainable, you understand your audience, you'll be there for a while to help the brand. So because of this, I don't necessarily anticipate all of these newcomers immediately like coming in and taking half of our revenue. Even for the brands that wouldn't make sense. A lot of the brand relationships again come back to the relationship, right? So there might be some one-off situations where some new hot upshots showed up somewhere and they got quick attention from the brands and they showed up a bunch of brand deals. But then the next month, if they got, they lost their sizzle, so to speak, and they're no longer hot and we moved on to some other trend, same will unfortunately happen for all the brand deals for them. They're one-off examples like the Hug to a Girl who kind of like managed her way through, you know, turning her 10 minutes of fame into a couple of months worth of fame, but even that kind of like got derailed by a couple of bad decisions. So from that perspective as well, like I wouldn't get distracted if you see a couple of hot upshots in your niche taking a lot of attention because they did something viral. It's all about stability and consistency, especially when it comes to brand deals and brand partnerships, because they need that reliability and they need a reliable source who will always be there. And if you were there for them for the past few years and you promise you're going to be there with them for the next few years, they will trust you over the longer period of time. So I wouldn't, as I said, stress myself too much about that part. And then finally, and the big one, that we've referred to multiple times, should I be cutting my own business expenses? Yes. Yes, yes, please, yes. And not only the business. Think about all of your expenses. Now, how and where do you decide to do it? I would look and say, and if you're not really sure, you've never done this exercise, it can be done on a piece of paper, it can be done on like a whiteboard. Write out all the most crucial pieces and expenses that you need to sustain your personal life, right? So it's like your house, like what is my mortgage, what is my rent, right? Whatever, my household bills, my internet bill, my whatever food. If you have kids in school, maybe some school stuff, blah 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 blah. Nothing. There's not like, hey, I'm going and I don't know, going out to eat every couple of days. That's not critical. It should not make it on the list. So do all of those. And same for the business. What is most critical? If you have a couple of employees, unless you unfortunately will have to make a tough decision to let one of them go, if you consider them the must have to maintain because you cannot produce content without them, they're on the list. If you can produce content without them, maybe that's something to discuss and debate on, because ultimately you're responsible not only for yourself, you're responsible for your family, you're also responsible maybe for some other employees. And that's how unfortunately some of the layoffs happen, is that to save more of the rest of the employees, you kind of have to cut a couple to save the expenses. So like, unfortunately, look at the people as well. Are they that critical for you to maintain your business? Look at all the different expenses. Do you need 5 different music subscriptions for your music source? Sure, it makes it a little bit more artistic, but you can probably get away, honestly, with YouTube free library, right? There's a lot of content out there with this way. You don't need Epidemic Artlist and some other ones, right? How many licenses do you need for editing? Like if you only have one person editing, do you need multiple different Adobe subscriptions? Can you get away with one? Look at if you have an office space right now, are you really using it? Would it be something that you can get away with if you have a smaller space? If you don't have space at all and you just produce content at your home in a spare bedroom, right? Anything that is critical, that is required for you to create content, should make it on the list. Anything that's up for debate, put it on a separate list or try to exclude it for now and see where you are. Ideally, once you have that list, that's your must have, that's your waterline. That's where your expenses need to be. Leave maybe a little bit of the room for safety, but from then on out, any other savings that you generate, say you maintain roughly the same revenue that you have right now, but that's waterline is kind of like below that, my recommended 20% of savings, go all the way down to that line. Go all the way down to that line, anything above it in the revenue, put it in the war chest. And again, it can be tough, as I said, especially when it comes to, say, like moving out of office space you might enjoy, but it's a luxury. Do you really have to be there? Can you still create content if you have a spare bedroom and be as effective? Do you really need to have 5 different editors on standby? Maybe you can get away with 1 or 2. Maybe you can still do projects, but on a project basis, not on a salary basis. Like, again, it can be a tough decision to make. And a lot of companies in those cases make a personal decision to maintain someone because it's another person's life and you kind of like, also want to be responsible for it. But as I said, take it with the approach of you are responsible for your business, for longevity of that business and for your family first, right? So whatever can be done to support it, do it. And if you shore up some of the savings, if things improve, nothing stops you from going and hiring that person again, or moving to a new office space, or bringing back some of those extra music subscriptions that you have. Ultimately, in my strong opinion, don't assume things will be the same. Don't look at news articles that say, hey, we don't have recession, and kind of like ignore everything that says we'll have recession. We will have economic downturn. We are already living through the economic downturn. My wife has like physical product goods, like business. We see through that. We see it through all the conversations with our friends and family members. I work with several businesses. I talk to them. I see with them seeing the economic downturn. No matter what politicians are telling you, this is what's happening. This is happening, and it's not going to be released, even if, say, they promise that, oh, things are improving, tariffs will help, say, United States specifically. They won't, because no one's paying a tariffs, because no one is importing goods. They're like, oh, we're going to cut the interest rates and it's going to help. It will not. Whole probably separate video, but interest rate cut only really means that the businesses will get access to the cheaper capital, and they'll use that capital to do stock buybacks and dividend increases to help shore up the stock price, not to help people and their salaries, right? So unfortunately, and I'm sorry being a Debbie Downer on this one, do not assume things will go well. Assume things will at least go down by 20%, if not more. And as I said, coming back to expenses, really just focus on the most critical expenses and cut everything else and put it in the war chest. Here's the scenario, and this is, I'll use the way to wrap up because this was the last 12 question. Tell me which scenario you want to be in. Do you want to be in the scenario where you have to completely fire your entire team, shut down your business, go back to the 9 to 5 or whatever you were doing before, and risk that under the assumption, hey, hopefully things will be better? Because on the positive of that, right? So it's on the negative side. On the positive of that scenario, nothing really happens as bad as I think it will, or some other people think it will, and you're okay. So you kind of like have that swing, right? Things gonna be okay. They're not gonna be better than okay, in my opinion, in that scenario, or things gonna be really bad and you're gonna have shut down your creative business and go back to 9 to 5. Your second scenario, you assume things will not improve, so like your upside is much lower, but then you shore up your expenses, you shore up the cash, and you kind of like make sure you have some war chest to stabilize your business. And even if you lose all your revenue streams, hopefully for the next 6 to 12 months, if you follow that formula, you kind of like still have some expenses to maintain yourself. You have kind of like this smaller gap and smaller variability. Which one do you want to be in? If you're high risk tolerance and you're okay with that large variety from things going to be okay to, hey, I'm going to shut down my business, versus things might not be okay and I'm going to be over here and it's going to be struggling, but hey, on the negative side, I might just lose some money and go a few months without the revenue, but I have a war chest, excuse me, to maintain for it. I know I'm a little bit more conservative in those cases, more risk averse when it comes to those, because of the fact that businesses, it's all about sustainability, and the more sustainable scenario is that second one. Cut down your expenses, focus on some of the couple of offensive revenue plays, but really just focus on managing to a much lower revenue expectation. And the good news, say, if things pan out to the original scenario, you know what's the better part is? You've shored up a bunch of cash now in your bank account that luckily you didn't have to deploy, so now you can go and maybe intelligently invest it, and it's almost like becomes your extra war chest, maybe for the future. You just maintain it, put it in some index fund or put it in some CDs and kind of like let it just accumulate for the future in case something happens. Or you go and invest it in your business idea, you go invest it into some interesting opportunities, maybe some additional new equipment, right? Like if things go well and economy improved, there is no reason why that second scenario is the worst. And the worst part of it really comes from, again, giving up some luxuries that you currently have from the expense perspective, not eating out as much, not maybe having an office space, not having as many employees, as many subscriptions. But to me, that's worth it because you guarantee yourself that you maintain that business that you work so hard to build. You work probably a decade plus on building your creator business. Why would you risk it on a whim of like, I think things gonna go well. I'm just not gonna look over there, but I hope things gonna go well. That's a bad strategy. As again, someone who've been doing commercial operations and strategy for the past like 15, now actually getting close to 20 years, I'd rather be more conservative, suffer a little bit in the meantime with some inconveniences, but assure myself that I can maintain my business long term. But it's about just me. If you want to roll the dice, it's your dice and your money to roll. But you know now where my bias is and where I stand on this. So I hope this was useful. I hope all of these questions kind of like, as I said, I try to pick some of the ones that I feel like are the most relevant, again, based on like 4 different sources that I use to gather those. Let me know in the comment section below if you have any other questions that I didn't touch that you feel like really critical for you to decide on what you're going to do next as kind of like this entire situation evolves. And we will continue on this channel talking about different, both, as I said, ways to create more sustainable business, ways to generate more revenue, how to think through it, how to think about the investments, all the exciting stuff. I just went through a series of videos about the investments. So if you're interested in potentially acquiring some, partners who are going to go and invest in your business, check out, there's a bunch of videos, anything from what the investment looks like, the type of investment, how to present it, how to think about the deck, how to think about financial modeling for it, a lot of exciting stuff. And you can always just reach out to me and say, hey, I'm interested in this topics. Can we talk? Or can you point me to one of your videos where you discussed this before? Happy to do so. And I'll see you next Saturday. Peace.